Well, hey, Brianna. Do you like
Hi.
Bree or do you like Brianna?
I typically go by Bree.
So I was reading your website yesterday and I realized you're a professor at Bethel,
I am.
which is where I got my undergrad. So it's like
Yes,
small
how I
world.
it is. I teach they have a undergrad art therapy program now. So I teach the art therapy class in undergrad, and then also I'm teaching in their master's counseling program, teaching child and adolescent
Wow,
counseling.
that's great. And then you have your own private practice as well.
Yes, yep, I
Yeah.
have my practice, and I see about 15 clients a week. I either clinical clients or like more non-clinical, like just spiritual based art therapy sessions. I have a few of those too.
Yeah. I wonder if people might enjoy hearing the difference between clinical and non-clinical.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my clinical sessions, typically people are coming in because of a diagnosis. So whether it's anxiety or depression, or I work with a lot of teens with ASD or ADHD. So just symptom management and working on expressing your feelings that can help manage when things get really hard. My non-clinical sessions are kind of more loose, which is nice. What I do with my spiritual sessions are I open it up in prayer, and I have a very structured directive for them to do. It's a bit always Bible based. And then we spend time doing art together and then sharing. It's more about connecting you with the Lord versus like symptom management. It can be therapeutic, but that's not the goal of it. The goal is for you to kind of feel whole in a different way versus like symptom management, if that makes sense.
That's a good distinguishment between symptoms and just being whole.
Yeah,
Yeah, personal development versus a very specific symptom that's wanting to be managed.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then you've also made some posts on Instagram and stuff about post-traumatic growth. And I think a lot of people hear about post-traumatic stress disorder and PTSD, but I don't think
Mhm.
very many people talk about the growth that can come from it. Would you
Yeah,
mind saying a few things?
I would love to. In my book, the chapter on suffering, I think the thing that I thought I resonated the most with was post traumatic growth. And I share that a lot with clients because it's something that is missed of how can we use the suffering that have gone through as a way to grow. Not that we go through suffering for the growth. I think it's just part of life. But how can we use it to move forward? So there's different ways, whether it's helping other people through what you have gone through when you feel like you have kind of healed or have come to grips with what has happened, or it's being an advocate, or whatever it is, it's how you grow, become a stronger person, a stronger mother, a stronger sister, a stronger whatever in relationships or closer to God or whatever it is, how you grow from the trauma.
That's such a good, important factor. So many people get stuck right there of like, oh, it's just a trauma. I'm like damaged for life. And we forget that there is hope, there's healing, there's something beyond that. And this is not the end of the road. And I think it's amazing that God can redeem the worst of situations.
You can. And I think it's also important to like, you are allowed to be upset and you have to go through that grieving process. You have to go
Mm.
through the healing process. But part of the healing process can also be helping other people. I think that can be a part of it as well, as long as you make sure that you're also working on your own healing and whatever that looks like too.
Yeah, there's the two sides of it. It's not just looking in and spending time alone. It's connecting and reaching out too. And healing looks different for everybody, just like grieving looks different for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we dove right into this, and I forgot to like kind of let you introduce yourself. Could you just say a little bit about your family, just so they kind of get to know who you are?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Bree. I live in Minnesota. I am a registered art therapist, clinical counselor. I have my own practice. I teach art therapy at Bethel, and I teach adolescent counseling and the master's program at Bethel. I am really, really passionate about art therapy and spirituality and mental health combined, and how using art is a way to connect with God has always been how I have connected with God since I was a little girl. And so being able to use this as a profession is really cool.
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, I'm married. My husband, he's also a therapist. He is not an art therapist. He works with first responders, and he loves working with adult men who don't want to go to therapy. It's kind of his niche right now, which is really
Hey, that
needed.
is a unique niche. Well done.
Yes, and he does it really well. He does it really well. It's a great dynamic to be married to have two therapists be married to each other, but also it can have some hiccups as well. And we have 2 kiddos, and then we have 2 wiener dogs.
And how did you discover art therapy?
When I was growing up, I have really deep feelings, intense feelings, always
Mm.
struggled with anxiety and depression, and art was always my go-to, my outlet. I had no idea what art therapy was forever. For a long time, I was going to go to school to be a counselor because I wanted to help people who had gone through situations like me. And I was enrolled in the at Bethel, and then I was going through a really intense breakup with someone that we were planning on getting married. And my healing process was I went to my art. I remember vividly, I was in my prayer/art room in my little apartment, and I was doing art, and I was like, "Ah, I wish I could just do this and therapy. Why can't I do both?" And then I remember the Lord being like, "Breathe, that is a thing. Like, it's called art therapy. Like, go do that." And I was like, all right. So I enrolled in the art therapy program, and it was completely resonated with everything that I had ever experienced in my life. And what I'm passionate about is combining art and mental health and all of the things. So that's how I got into my program. And now I have my own practice because I was tired of working for other people and wanting to really incorporate faith and being supported and being able to have flexibility, to be able to teach, to be able to be a mom, to be able to write a book, to be able to do non-clinical work. So I have my own practice, which has been a big journey, but it's been really nice too.
Cool. Yeah, and so you have a book.
Yes.
I saw that. And can you describe that to people a little bit?
Yeah. So it's called The Creative Connection. It's a interactive art therapy devotional. So it's broken up into 5 different subjects. So the first one is prayer. So I go through mental health benefits of prayer, actual research statistics of like how praying is actually good for your mental health. And then I talk about how people have prayed with art and like how art and prayer is connected. And then I give an example of how you can use prayer and art together. And then I give people prompts of what are you praying for? What does that look like? And then an art therapy prompt of now I want you to make this for yourself. I don't create space in the book because I don't want it to be limited to just like the 12 by 17 pages, but I want you to then do it by yourself. So I have 5 different sections that kind of go through that model. So prayer, meditation, worship, forgiveness, suffering, of how mental health combined with those work together, and then art therapy combined with those, and then a directive for you to go through.
That sounds like a really nice pacing.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about post-traumatic growth. We talked a little bit about your story, the things that you offer people, and the teens being kind of a niche for you. And that one of your things, I think earlier you said you really wanted to help those teens with those big emotions.
Yes.
And I wonder if that might be a good place to kind of dig in a little bit for people that are working with teens, parents of teens. Maybe some teens will listen in.
Yes. One thing I do with pretty much all of my clients is I give them an altered book. So I give them an old book. They get to pick out, I have a big bookshelf that they can pick out, just a regular old book. And they pick it out, and I show them my examples of the books, because it's how I use my own art processing as I go into my altered book. And we just do art around it, whether it's found poetry in there or there's like just a word, and then we scribble off the rest of the page and then we paint on it or whatever it is. But it's a unique way to do art that isn't as intimidating. Sometimes I think I've given clients blank journals too, but sometimes it's a little intimidating to all this huge white space of like, oh my gosh, what do I do with all this? So it being a book, it being, I don't know what to do. Well, I'm just going to look at the words and see if anything pops out at me. And it's really cool to see the things that do pop out at you, why those words resonated with you. And then
that really is amazing to take a random page in a book and be like, this is like a story about something I'm not even interested in. And suddenly words start popping up and you're like, oh, it's here. It's nice to have a starting point so you don't feel like you have to come up with it all on your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I've really found that resonates really well with my teens. And then I will give them homework to work on at least one page throughout the week. Some clients really love it and they want me to give them more prompts for the week. So I'll write on Post-it notes and fill it up in their book for them to go into, because that's how they heal, is how they go into their art book. So I have found that to be really helpful with everybody who's gone through it. And then they bring it back in the next week and we talk about the things that they have made. And then we can go deeper within the metaphors and the images that they have created. And just kind of a great launching space to go deeper too.
Yeah. And I have found with teens that they really, I mean, everybody I think does pretty well with metaphors, but especially teens, because it really takes that pressure off of me. And
Yes.
they engage their brain in a really different way when you're talking metaphor and art.
Yes. Yeah. It's not having to be as direct. I think they're used to parents asking, how are you doing? And needing a real direct response versus like, I don't know, I feel like a butterfly today. And let's talk about what that butterfly looks like when it's whatever. Like
Mhm.
it's a way to talk about your feelings and draw your feelings in a way that isn't as intense and a little bit disconnected. So you don't feel as so much pressure.
Do you have any tips for parents of teens of maybe some good questions they could have in their back pocket?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with them, with working with teens, being a parent of a teen, just to be present with them, creating opportunities to just sit with them and be around, and giving them space. I think I've noticed a lot with my teen clients that they are tired of their parents always asking them how they're doing because they know that they're struggling, but being able to check in a not direct way. So just creating time, like just go get some coffee, and if you want to talk about something you can, versus like let's sit down and you tell me all your feelings about the day, can be a little intense because they probably don't know what they're feeling, and to be able to put them into words and is really hard, and they don't know how to do that right now. They just don't. It's too much.
Yeah, that's such a good point there is sometimes they just don't have the words for it. So you ask that question, seems like it should have a very direct answer, but it's anything but because they don't even have the vocabulary sometimes for it, or they haven't had the time to process and connect with themselves of like, well, what is all that in that jumbled mess of I'm not doing great today?
Right.
And I talk with some of my parents about, narrating their own stuff. Like
Yeah.
you lead by example. Say like,
Yes.
I'm feeling this way in my stomach, or I'm feeling really angry at that driver. So I'm just going to take a deep breath.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sometimes that helps give the words, and I know we're talking teens, but like with the younger kids, there's a lot of really good emotion books out there to just sit down and do story time. Not about your kid. It's just,
Yep.
we're going to read a story.
Yep.
What
Yep.
have been some helpful things for the parents of the teens you've worked with creating that time to connect and making it feel safe so that the kids can kind of bumble around and find those words or find that space to open up to their parents? Like what makes that a safe space, a safe connection point for their kids or
I
teens?
think what can be helpful is that they know that they're going to have a time with their parent. So it being like, however often you're able to make it, but like, this is our one-on-one time and you always have it if you need it. We can also just sit and do homework together. But if you want to talk about something, it's here. And also knowing that, and like parents making it explicit that this is a safe place. So if there's something that you want to talk about that you really are nervous about, you're not going to get in trouble right now. We're just going to talk about it and I'm not going to yell at you. And so I think a lot of things I work with parents is their own regulation, exactly what you were talking about, because kids and teens will feed off, especially if they're anxious. They're going to be really empathetic and they're going to feel everything their parents are feeling. So to really encourage parents to be in check with their emotions and regulate themselves, even if it feels really awkward to do that in front of your kid. You're allowed to do the deep breathing. You're allowed to cry in front of them. You're allowed to do those things, but you need to make sure you're in check, because if you're trying to hold it all together, your kids are going to sense it and they're going to try to hold it all together and not be real with you.
Yeah. Or they're going to try to comfort you.
Yeah. And that's not their
Instead
fault.
of you trying to comfort them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So really setting it up, having it on the calendar, like this is our time
Mm-hmm.
together and not always having to go deep, right?
Yeah. You can just do something fun.
Yeah.
Do
That
something
connection
silly.
is so important.
It's really important.
Yeah.
And I think that's just part of the role of being a therapist, I think, and just having like a weekly time for somebody. Just even that is therapeutic and healing because they know they have space to talk about it. Not every week do my clients talk about deep stuff. Sometimes we just paint pictures that make us happy and we can talk about fun wins. But them knowing that they have a space and an adult to talk to is helpful. And that can be the same with their parents. It's different, obviously, like you don't always want to talk about your dating life with your parents, but having a space to have that could be helpful.
Yeah. And I also love that you said this is not a space where you're going to get in trouble.
Yes, I think that's also really important too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like maybe there's a consequence coming, but we're not going to talk about that.
No, we're just going to sit and I'm going to be here for you.
Yes. Sit and be here for you. Do you have any favorite directives? You mentioned the found books, and for people who aren't familiar with that, any suggestions on where they could pick up some books that would be okay to destroy, alter, draw in?
Yes, so my husband collects antiques. I tag along to those stores. I look at the old books. I like the old books because they have thick pages. You want to make sure they have thick pages. And I look through the words and trying to find deep words. I like a lot of poetry books. I think those are pretty safe. You're not going to find any mostly inappropriate things in there. I like having a hardcover. You don't want it to be too old where it's just going to fall apart either.
Thrift shops could be a good place too.
Yes, absolutely.
You mentioned the found word art where you kind of skim through a page, find those words that for whatever reason resonate, then paint out the rest and do something with it. Any other directives that you have found really helpful that either you love or the teens love?
I had normally do this with most clients is having them do on a page or whatever it's in the book or somewhere else, is like having them do art with the right hand and then having them do art separately with their left hand. And noticing how their thought patterns change between which one and their dominant hand or non-dominant hand. So I think it mirrors how they can be in stressful situations where they don't feel like they have control. So it's a way to be able to pull out their inner logic and their intrusive thoughts in a safe, fun way. And then we can talk about it and then we can try to do it again. And let's encourage ourselves in the art. It's, you normally don't draw with your left hand if you're right-handed. So how can you rewire your brain in what you're thinking and encourage yourself? Because that is a perfect way to model and practice it. Then like when you go and try out for cheerleading and you've never done it before and you're terrified, you can then use those skills that you've tried in art to then use that when you're doing something that's a little new and scary.
I love that, where you can be having fun, actually building a skill, having fun that you could apply later in a different place. And remember that you had success with it. Now, when you do the right hand and left hand drawings, do you do it like one at a time or do you do them at the same time?
This one is separate. I do normally do a bilateral scribble drawing at the that's the very first thing I do with every client, just to introduce them to art therapy and the mind and body connection. This one is separate so that you are seeing how you think when you have control and then seeing how you think when you don't have control.
Yes. And for left-handed people, just reverse those two because their dominant hand would be left.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's a good one. How do you think? How do you feel when you feel in control and it's familiar and when it's not? So many applications in the wide world for that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And do you often have them verbally or in written form process their takeaways or what that experience was like for them?
Yeah, I always ask questions afterwards and we talk about it. I've used to have them write things down, but I think I've had feedback of like, this seems too much like school. I don't want to be in school. So we just talk about it. And then that way it can kind of free flow with what comes up. Yeah.
And what are some good questions after doing the left hand, right hand drawings?
What were the thoughts that came in your head? When you look at both pieces, what do you see? What do you like about both of them? What do you not like about both of them? Which parts were hard? What are similar about them? What's different about them? How did you encourage yourself when you were working with your non-dominant hand?
That's a good one.
How were you mean to yourself? Would you say those things to other people? Like if I was doing this art, would you say that to me?
Probably
Challenging
not.
them a little bit. Right. Yeah. You're not going to say that to other people. So why do we talk so mean to ourselves?
Yeah. Is it like a free draw with each hand or do you have them draw something the same thing with each hand?
Depends. Sometimes if they need a little containment, they can draw a circle and draw in the circle. Otherwise, it's just kind of normally free, whatever you want. And they can do different things with each ones. Yeah, I wanting them to have the autonomy and the control in what they're doing.
It's really nice for teens,
Yes, they need it.
for
They
their
need
stage of development and life of
Mhm.
trying to transition from being a child at home to being an independent adult. And there's a lot going on there.
There's so much going on.
Anything else you'd like to say about that? Are we missing any pieces from that activity?
I don't think so. I think another, like, I guess with art therapy at the end of every session, I always ask them if they want to take their art home, if they want to keep it in my office, or if they want to throw it away. Because sometimes it might be too raw for them to take home and they just want me to keep it in my little filing cabinet. And knowing that if you are a parent of a teenager, that they might create some really dark art, and that is normal and that is okay. I've had parents really be concerned about, oh, well, I was going through their sketchbook. Well, first of all, don't do that.
Thank you. Yeah.
I've been really impressed with parents when, like, I had a client draw something really intense in one of her drawings, and I was like, oh my gosh, how is this going to translate when she brings this home? And so I asked her, I was like, how are you going to talk to mom and dad about this? Because they're probably going to ask, because it was a little too big for them to hide. And they're like, I already told them and they know. I was like, okay, great. So I still brought that out and like touched base with them. Like, this is pretty raw and intense and it just represents how they're feeling. And mom was totally like, yep, totally get it. And so supportive. And I was like, this is how it should be. And it's not always that case. I think parents just get so freaked out, but they need to get these feelings out. They need to draw really dark things sometimes, and that's okay.
Because what's the alternative? If we
Right.
don't get the dark out,
Absolutely.
How do you explain that to parents, that they might draw something super dark? It doesn't mean they're going to act on something super dark. They're trying to figure things out. Do you have kind of a way that you help parents understand that and not get so nervous and scared about those expressions?
I say exactly that.
Okay.
That this is just how they're feeling, and it doesn't mean that they're going to do these things. I am always very like, if they show me the art pieces, we talk about it, and I'm assessing safety for them, especially if like they've never had any of those attempts or self-harm or anything, and they're just drawing dark stuff and they're depressed. Like, that makes sense. And they're not, and they have a support system, and they're going to their art. Yeah, that's how I would describe it with the parents.
That's part of being a safe person, is being able to show that you can hold the dark sides. I always think it's such an honor that the trust has been built when they do show that stuff.
It
And
is.
to try to keep my emotions neutral around it, so that I stay safe. So that's hard for parents. They're a little baby.
It is hard for parents, and they're like, why did they draw this picture of them like cutting, like stabbing someone? I'm like, well, it's their feelings, and it doesn't mean that this is what's really going to go on in their head or what's happening in their life. Sometimes it feels like they're getting stabbed in the head. Doesn't mean that they actually are going to do that.
Yeah. And that helps open a conversation when you go towards the feeling, not just the picture, like, as a fact. Tell me more about why this is the image that came to mind to describe how you're feeling. It's very eye-opening, I think.
It is.
Helps us understand what they're actually experiencing. Any other tips, thoughts that you want to share today?
So I think just encouraging whoever's listening to take steps and create for yourself, and whatever that looks like is important.
Whatever that looks like. That's I love that about art therapy and art in general, or creativity, is there's so many ways to do it.
There is.
Well, thanks so much for your time today. It's fun to talk about teens and altered books, and then that hope of we grieve and we deal with hard things, but that's not the end of the story.
It's not.
There's growth after, and sometimes that happens alone, sometimes with the therapist and God, and sometimes it happens by reaching out to help someone else along.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.